Okay, good evening everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the External Services Select Committee at the London Borough of Hillingdon. This meeting is being broadcast live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon London, and the purpose of this committee is to monitor services provided by external organisations within its remit, and these are essentially organisations that provide public services within Hillingdon but aren't directly associated with the Council, and review their performance. We also undertake in-depth reviews and witness sessions on specific topics, especially those that interest our local community, and we submit our findings to the decision-making cabinet and then hopefully make good recommendations to those bodies. My name is Councillor Nick Denys and I'm chairman of this committee. Before we start, I have some important housekeeping for everyone present. Please ensure your mobile phones are off or on silent. We're not expecting a fire drill, so if the alarm does go off, please follow officers, and that would be Nikki, out of the building. Please keep your microphone muted when you aren't speaking, and then unmute to speak. And as chairman, I will call on those to speak, and ideally, obviously, speak through me if possible, because that makes the meeting flow better. Okay, excellent. So we'll move on to the agenda. Apologies for absence. Nikki, do we have any apologies?
Chairman, we've had apologies from Councillor Arnold and Councillor Darren Davies. And we've had apologies from Councillor Peter Money, and Councillor Mathers is here as his substitute.
Okay, thank you, and welcome Councillor Mathers. You were previously on this committee, so you know what to expect. Thank you. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest? No? Fantastic. Item 3 is exclusion of the press and the public. So most of this meeting will be in public, but the safer neighbourhood bit will be split. The first bit of it will be in public, and then the second bit of it will be in private, because there'll be some information we want to talk about which needs to be done in private. So is everybody okay with that? Okay, Roy? Okay, well, basically the beginning of item 7, where the chief superintendent and Jackie and will be in public, and you're very welcome to talk at that point. But then after that bit, we will go into private, and you'll be able to give your presentation at that point, if that's okay. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Right, so here we are. Oh, yes. Agenda item 4, minutes of the meeting of the 20th of July. In our hard copies, we had the minutes of the last Health and Wellbeing Board, which actually is very useful for this committee. So actually, thank you, Nikki, for that. It looked like a good meeting. But we then circulated the minutes of our last meeting, which was on the 20th of July. Does anybody have any comments on those minutes? No, thank you very much. Excellent. Okay, so we can go on to item 5, which is an item I'm quite excited about. It's the product of our investigation into children dental services and recommendations on how to improve them. Now, the recommendations, which are on pages 5 and 6, there are 9 recommendations, and from those of you who read the minutes, which I know are all of you, you'll see that basically they're what we agreed at the end of our last meeting when we finished doing our investigation. I mean, what I would like to say, since we agreed those, myself and Nikki have been and spoken to partners within the health and dental community about what we were thinking, and at some of those meetings I had tin hats on, thinking that I might be unpopular, but actually everything that we talked about seemed to be popular, and there's a group of those who are interested in local dental issues who meet regularly, and they said they thought that they really wanted to thank us for having a look at these issues and bringing some strands together that they maybe would have brought together without this outside eye. So it was really good to get that positive feedback. Also, we did speak internally to officers and to the cabinet members responsible, and I've got Councillor O'Brien here, who I will ask to say a few words if you wish to do so, Councillor O'Brien, after I've finish rambling on, to make sure that what we were recommending, was in the right sphere, and we got very good feedback. So, I feel very positive about this report. So hopefully we can agree it tonight and get it out there and hopefully see some improvements. So, would anybody like to say anything? And Councillor O'Brien, sorry, as one of the cabinet members responsible in this area, if you don't mind, it would be really interesting to hear your views.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think first of all I just want to thank the committee for allowing me to come and speak here this evening. What an absolutely excellent report. I was delighted when I had the opportunity to read it last week. Yesterday was the Health and Wellbeing Board and it was actually highlighted that this committee was doing this actual report, and very positive. So this sits very nicely under the Health and Wellbeing Board, under the Child Healthy Weight Plan, and it just shows that the work that this committee has done, and I believe there's been even changeover of committee members. So thank you for allowing the momentum to continue. And this report comes out at a very good time, because as we've come back into the new academic year, our partners will be rolling this out again as best as they can to schools. I was in some of the early years provisions earlier on in the before in the summertime, where they had already started to do this, the Brushing for Life initiative, and so it's coming out at the right time. It's been going on for a very long time. I think we've got absolute buy-in from our public health partners so that we can actually roll this out to schools. And my main comment was just to thank you all tonight for the very, very hard work that you've all done on a fantastic report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, two of the important things I think we did in this report was to have a yearly update to the relevant POC on this issue. That's our policy and overview committees. And also, secondly, to give a coordination overseeing role to our Health and Wellbeing Board, which Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Palmer very kindly agreed to do, because ultimately this is one of those issues that people have known is a problem, but people have looked at and it's fallen away. So having those two things hopefully will keep people focused. So that's really positive. Okay. Does anybody else have anything else to say? Or are we okay to approve this report? Fantastic. Excellent. Right. Thank you very much, Councillor O'Brien. You may stay or you may leave, as you wish. No, not at all. Not at all. Luckily, all of our meetings are saved on YouTube, so you can watch it at your leisure after you've had your dinner. Or brilliant. Okay, excellent. So yes, now we move on to our work programme, which is item 6. So firstly, at our last meeting, Councillor Arnold, who isn't here tonight, asked for an update on Hillingdon Hospital rebuild and how that's going. I've been having conversations with hospital officials about this, and we're at a time when essentially not much useful information can be given, because in positive news we're towards the end of the process, but what that means is that negotiations are ongoing about finalising everything. So it was felt it'd be better to give an update at our next meeting in October. And also as well, we're going to have a sole meeting on this at our 27th or 22nd of January meeting, where we fully look at what's happened, how the plans have changed, and what's going to go forward. Because hopefully at that point it'll be solidified exactly what's happening. So that's that. The other thing I wanted to mention is that at our next meeting we'll be doing one of our normal meetings where we get all the different health partners to come in and talk to us about what's going on. Now, my view was that it'd be good if we get a bit of focus on that meeting, so I wanted to set almost like 2 exam questions. And the first one is, are you prepared for winter? And the second one is, how bad is your backlog, and what are you going to do about it? Because I think ultimately those are the 2 issues that really matter to people most at the moment. So if you're okay with that, we'll set those 2 things as exam questions. And of course, if there are other things that they really want to tell us, they may. Does that sound okay, June? Okay, yeah, no numbers around the backlog and how many cases have got left over, I think, are very important.
I suppose in light of the reports that came out previously about Hillingdon Hospital around their infection control and the different aspects there would be quite useful as part of their preparedness for winter.
I think that's very good. Obviously, over the next couple of weeks, if anybody else has got any thoughts about focus underneath that, do let myself and Nikki know so we can help prepare them. But does that sound good? Okay. Any other comments on the work programme? No. Good. Excellent. Right. So we can move on to our main attraction for this evening, which is item 7, the Safer Hillingdon Partnership Performance Report. As I said at the beginning of the meeting, this is going to be split into 2 parts. The first part is public and the second part is private. The first part will be led by Chief Superintendent Peter Gardner and Sergeant Alison Keith. and the second part will be led by Roy Parsons. But Roy, you're very welcome to speak during the first part as well, as long as you're aware the first part is public. I suppose for us and for anybody who's watching at home, if you could introduce yourselves and just explain your roles, that'd be really fantastic. So I'll go across. I'll start with you, Roy.
Roy Parsons, Chair of Hillingdon Neighbourhood Watch.
Chief Superintendent Peter Gardner. I'm the Commander for West Area, which includes the Borough of Hillingdon.
Hello, Sergeant Alison Keith. I cover the Safer Schools team for Hillingdon Borough and the West Area. Good evening, Jackie Robertson, Service Manager for Community Safety.
So I'm happy to let you lead this bit as you wish. So go for it.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I'd like to start with schools because my colleague has to pick up her child. So I'll start with schools and then we'll get into an overview of performance, if that's okay with you.
Hello, good evening. Like I said, I'm Sergeant Keith. I cover the Safer Schools team for specifically Hillingdon on the West Area. It was just to give an oversight on the schools team and the work that we do with the boroughs. My team support the boroughs' secondary schools. I lead the team, and I ordinarily have approximately 10 police constables working underneath me. We have Safer Schools partnerships with the bulk of the secondary schools within Hillingdon Borough, which means we've got information sharing agreements and essentially work around supporting the DSLs and the heads with safeguarding, dealing with any crime that may crop up in their schools, preventative work in and around presentations, etc., and diversionary work that we've got. Most of my team hold 3 schools each. They work with the nominated schools, and most of them work with 3 schools within the borough. Like I said, we're there to support them in sort of 4 key areas around that. We do work with partners as well, so it's not just literally working with the schools. We do support the council in many different areas that they work in. So we support certainly the truancy team, and we work closely with the youth offending service, certainly around the crime side of things. I mean, my team's there, like I say, first and foremost, a lot of it's to do with the safeguarding around the young people that are in the schools. If any crime comes out, we do look into that. The aim is to try and divert the young people away from crime as opposed to criminalising young people. So my team are trained up and given the skills to be able to support them in that way and hopefully divert as opposed to putting them in front of court. They also, in and around that, do alternative work around. Some of them have set up their own clubs within the schools. These clubs are diversionary. We've got 2 running as we speak. COVID did cause a bit of an issue, but hopefully they'll get back up and running now. We can do a lot more face-to-face work. The idea behind the clubs is that those young people that are coming to notice are diverted, rather than diverted into detention, are actually diverted towards the officers. The officers can get to know the young people and support them and try and help them out of trouble and lead them away. We do link in with other agencies as well. So if we've got any young people we're not sure we can support and help, we will divert them certainly to other agencies as well to try and support us and keep them out of crime. We don't just do work within the schools, we are around during the holiday periods as well. So of late, some of the extra work that we've been doing has involved linking in with the truancy team. Children Missing in Education, a big piece of work done this summer was with the Children Missing in Education team to see where these young people are and try and get them back into education. We did actually receive thanks today from one of the parents whose young person wasn't attending and is now started off the school year in a much better way and is positively attending. We've also been involved in test purchasing on the borough, where we utilise the borough's cadets to check. Certainly, we've been looking at alcohol and knives, buying alcohol and knives, sales of alcohol and knives on the borough over the summer, because ultimately the sale of those type of things, one, leads to serious youth violence, and on the other hand, certainly from an alcohol perspective, can be a sign of children being involved in CSE and CCE. So it's testing the local shops to ensure that they're not selling to underage people, and they are challenging where appropriate, so that our young people aren't getting themselves into trouble and harm. That was a very brief whistle-stop tour, very brief of what we do. I don't know if you've got any further questions.
Thank you very much. Sorry. First of all, yeah, that's great, because that allows us to focus on what we're interested in as such. But I'll ask the first question, and I'll open it up to the rest of the committee. I'm interested in a bit more details about your diverting young people away from crime, and maybe how you look at that, maybe in a strategic way, and working with other partners. I mean, in my mind, I know of an example in Northwood Hills, where around Northwood Hills there were potential issues, because obviously a lot of children at the same time coming into the same place, which seemed to attract certain bad actors who thought they could benefit from those children there. And I know some sort of, there was I think some positive action taken there, for example. So I'd be really interested to understand, how you might decide where your action might be beneficial, and how you work with other partners in order to sort of try and basically make what potentially could be a dangerous situation into a better situation.
So from our perspective in schools, we link in with the DSLs, and if there's a young people flagging up to, certainly from the school's perspective, or in that case linked to the schools outside, we look at what the schools can do for them, and then look at what agencies are available. One of our main ports of call has to be the Access project, and work within the youth offending service, making sure that we, if we've got young people that are flagging up that aren't in social care, unknown to social care, generally that level of young person we're looking at, rather than being open to social care already. It's the ones that aren't known to social care that maybe are just missing out on that support and help. Making sure school flagging those ones up to us, so that we can support schools, like getting school number one to flag them up, and if they're not, pushing them into that, or highlighting them to the Access project to make them aware, number one, of these people if they are getting involved in something they shouldn't, to try and get them involved with their people to work with them, and to try and steer them away from trouble. And then ultimately, from Access's perspective, they'll map out, when you highlight a young person to them, they'll map out where they are and who their links are with, so we get a better idea of who they are associating with, because it's not always, from a school perspective, when you're in a school, it's not always clear outside of school who they're necessarily mingling with. It's just making sure those communication channels are open.
Just as I'm going to take a quick follow-up. Chairman's prerogative completely, then I'll come to those who've raised their hands. How do you get your information about where to target and who needs help? And I suppose a sort of question around that is how keen are schools on you helping? Because I have heard some stories about schools basically being a bit nervous, maybe, about for their own reputational needs. I'm not saying a school wouldn't actually want to safeguard properly. So yeah, how do you get your information, and how do you find working with schools on this type of stuff?
So ultimately, the schools generally tend to like the support and help that we can give them. I suppose it's always, for a lot of them, a problem shared is a problem halved, and we can support them in that way. There are schools on the borough that are slightly quieter. Certainly in some of the activities they do, maybe not as engaging. I think, like you say, there's a reputational worry around that. But ultimately, to be fair, for the bulk of them, when we work with them, when you look at things like, I didn't say that we do sort of weapon screening operations within the school, actually uptake, like I say, COVID has in the last year made it quite difficult. But ordinarily, when it's not, the uptake's massive, and actually the schools look at it as, rather than we've got a problem or we want police there, they look at it as, actually, we're there to support them, we're there to look after their young people. We don't have a problem here, but we're making it clear we don't want a problem here, and we want to prevent it. And it's they see it more as a safeguarding, and that is the message when they're put the message out to the parents. That is the message the bulk of the schools, the majority of the schools are given, that we're there to support them and help them. It's not because we have a problem, and that's generally the message that tends to come forward when we're working. That's the message a lot of them have adopted, engaged, and that's the message they send out to parents when when I've worked with them around how we support and help them.
Thank you. June.
Okay, you said you've got 2 clubs within the school that you work with. Why are there only just 2 clubs when there's so much going on around the school? And if the school are so engaging with you and welcoming what you're doing, why have there not been more clubs involved, more 2 clubs involved?
At the moment, a lot of it's to do with resourcing. They're quite resource intensive because ultimately, from our perspective, when officers do the clubs, you need at least 2 people within the clubs. I only have a team of 10, and I've got to balance that with the needs of the borough priorities around crime and protecting the young people as well. So the clubs that we do run are covered over 3 or 4 schools. They are offered out to 3 or 4 schools where generally we see sort of needs that are coming in. If I had a bigger team, I could probably offer out a few more clubs. A lot of it is down to just pure resourcing. I only have a team of 10, and we sort of do our best in and around that.
And can I ask about the youth bus that the council provide that goes around? How are you engaged with that?
Generally, my team work early in the day, so I am aware of the work they do, and certainly I know that my pupil referral unit officers are aware and links in with them. Ultimately, we link in with Axis, so if anything's flagging in to them, we can get made aware of it that way.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, thank you for the work you're doing. I used to work in schools alongside Safe Schools officers, and it was fantastic to have that multi-agency work. I suppose that's the kind of thing that's in my mind at the moment. A lot of the agencies you're working with are young people. If they're involved in YOS, they have already been engaged with crime or identified, and if you're going through designated safeguarding leads, etc. So it's about before they get to that point. And I suppose what more could be done in this borough? And I suppose if you've got insight from other boroughs, Ealing, Hounslow, etc., how to engage young people before or de-escalate them through to more things such as universal youth services, local voluntary groups, etc. We know that there's been cuts to youth services generally across the country. I'm not going to make it too political, but it's just that kind of without those early intervention services and even those universal services, how easy is it to de-escalate? What other practices there in other boroughs, and what can Hillingdon's partners, including the local authority, do to make it easier for young people to be diverted, and so it's not just reliant on your smaller team. And my other small question is, I assume you have coverage over all secondary schools in the borough. It'd be useful to know if there are any gaps or ongoing concerns in terms of engagement. Thank you, Chair.
So, yes, we cover from a secondary school perspective. Every secondary school either has a named SSO or is in a Safe Schools partnership, so they will have an officer contact, should they want any support or help. So the coverage is there from that perspective. In terms of, so in relation to the first part, in terms of other practices, ultimately from our perspective, because we work with the schools, we are relying on the DSLs to be flagging up any of those early behaviours to make us aware. Like you say, it's those ones that are, I suppose, the way you'd look at it is persistent disruptive behaviour. So we're looking at those that are coming to notice before they've gone into the social system, and for us to engage with those young people and work with them, and ultimately as well with schools to try and, like you say, to get the diversion in before they get into the statutory services level. In terms of other boroughs, I'd have to look into exactly what things they run. My colleagues have running. I don't know of much else, but I'd have to have a look into exactly what they run to be able to answer. I couldn't answer that fully, but I can certainly look into it and see if there's any gaps on our side from a Hillingdon Council perspective that maybe could be filled or maybe of good practice. that I could share with you.
I mean, that would be interesting if you did do that, to either let Nikki know about it so she can report back to us, and ultimately we will be having a second meeting next year, so again that might be another opportunity, so but it's always interesting to learn what others are doing and how we can do better. Okay, one more,
Sorry, it's a particular area of interest in schools. It would be useful to get a little bit more of an insight into your curriculum. So obviously we've had some very alarming incidents, particularly around knife crime, violent crime. It'd be useful to get an insight into what issues you're currently doing preventatively or education-wise with those, particularly in the secondary school age. If you would, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. From our perspective, so we, once again, pre-COVID, we had Your Life You Choose programme running. It was in all secondary schools across Hillingdon Borough. That is it's a multi-agency drop-down event, which covered a number of topics around, what did it cover? Generally included, it was a mixture, but generally included you had knife crime, CCE, CSE, it covered drugs, it covered aspects around the court system and how the court system worked, along with sort of grooming and that kind of work. That goes generally, not always, but generally goes out to the Year 7 pupils. That is now back with the schools being open in full capacity, because that's been a big issue. That's been one of the key problems with the schools being closed, trying to get that message across, and especially dealing with the schools in that they don't want us to do an online presentation when they're not in school, because ultimately you can't safeguard a child in its home, and a lot of it's about being in the class with them, being able to speak to an adult afterwards. That has been for the last month, the last year. But ultimately that's what Your Life You Choose covers. It covers a myriad of topics and around that, aimed specifically at the Year 7s, and the idea is it's in all the secondary schools, so that as the years go on they will have all had that input when they arrive. Above and beyond that, we tend to cover personal safety and robbery, just to make sure when they're out and about from a low-level ASB, just to keep themselves aware of what they're doing and try not to become victims of crime as well as becoming the criminals themselves. Knife crime is always a key topic that we are willing to cover for them. Historically I've tended to use an alternative agency for drugs and drug support. We can utilise within the Met, we've got the arms unit will come along and do a talk around gangs, drugs, guns, etc. We've got that one that runs. We'll do presentations around, it's very big and key in the media, certainly this year, sexual offences and issues that have obviously arisen from that. Along with actually, if they've got an issue, we are willing to sit down and be it a short chat or a proper presentation, talk about all sorts of key topics that young people can get themselves into trouble with. So it might be a case of a school might say, I've got a slight issue with media communication and children bullying each other. We will quite happily come in and either present or do an assembly on around those topics, very ad hoc, just to raise awareness of it and the troubles that the young people can get themselves into. So it is very much flexed and tailored to the school and what the school would like and when they'd want it, if they want it.
Thank you. Hina.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously your team is focused around secondary schools. I presume there's a team that focuses on primary schools too, and I'm just wondering what kind of preventative measures are taken for the primary school children as they transition from primary to secondary. Obviously they're quite impressionable. Maybe that's the right time to kind of capture them and instill all the knowledge to keep them safe and safe around their peers and all the key topics that you've just described. I just think that's quite a good cohort, so I just wonder what work you do around primary.
So not specifically my team. Historically, yes, before we became West Area, that did fall down to my team, and we did basically used to do transition, as you say, we did used to offer out transition talks to the Year 6s going into Year 7s, and we'd come in for a good hour, an hour and a half, and cover a whole host of topics before they went up to high school, because essentially, God bless them, as they transition up, they go from being big fish in a little pond, as I describe it, to very little fish in a big pond, and they're some of them can be very naive and unaware. So that did go on. However, since West Area has come along, we've now got the Youth Engagement Team. Youth Engagement Team specifically has officers that cover the primary schools on the borough. There's one for each each borough, and that officer will liaise with the schools. And in that comes the presentation, diversion side of things, and they have a big programme running to support the schools in whatever the needs are. They certainly do. I know they do transition talks. They've got, from a Your Life You Choose perspective, they have a slightly truncated version because, as you say, actually it's becoming more noticeable that children of a much younger age, year 6 and year 5, are becoming involved in things they not necessarily shouldn't, and we are aware that we do need to get that message in, although in a slightly different manner. We do need to get that message in slightly earlier, so that they are there. And the schools, certainly from the Hillingdon perspective, I have attended the DSL meeting. They all have my details, they have my email address, and if they do ever want any input, any support, help, they can come to me, and if I can't give it myself, I can pinpoint them in the right direction, so that the primaries do also have that point of contact into us and are able to get the support and help that they do need, or the preventative work that they do need as well.
Thanks. So is that all the primary schools have a connection or someone that they can actually reach out to?
There should be. There for each of the, I don't cover the YET team, but my understanding is on the YET team there is an officer for each borough, and they will be able to contact that officer. And like I said, I've been into DSL meetings, and if they can't get hold of them, they've been told to come through me, and they've all got my phone number, and I've told them more than willing for them to any problems, ping me a call, and I'll either try and help them sort it out, or alternatively, I'll point them in the right direction of the person that they need. So if they don't know, that
offer is open for all primary schools.
Yeah.
Debbie.
Thanks, Sergeant. Really interesting to hear about your work and your project. Do you think the police are the right organisation to be delivering this kind of stuff in schools? In your personal opinion, the way I see it is that if I were a young person in a secondary school and surrounded by a gang culture and thinking and very taken by it and attracted to that way of life, and someone came into an assembly at school, someone that I didn't know, someone in a uniform representing an organisation that I didn't trust, would I listen to them? And I'm a big fan of the police. I think you guys are amazing, but I'm trying to put myself in the perspective of the person that you are trying to target. And we're not going to reform the system today at this meeting. You have got unparalleled level of experience. You are the person out of every single person in this room that knows the answer to this. And my question is, what would you think of an alternative system whereby the police worked to fight gangs, violence, knife crime, all the things that we don't want, by training and developing the people that your targets actually trust? What about a completely different system built from bottom up with you working with community members or youth workers or teachers, or just people that these people actually know who aren't in a uniform and who aren't associated with the police? Personal opinion only.
The role of the SSO is to try and break down those barriers. So those people you are specifically speaking about, the role of the SSO, we don't go in there heavy-handed. The idea is to build those relationships, go in there in uniform and actually be a face that they recognise, a face that they know. So when they're out and about, and this does actually happen, when they're out and about, rather than enforcing the law, we are there to try and divert and support and help them. So that actually it brings that element of trust that you're wanting and you talk about, and that they recognise the police officer and will turn to the police officers. So the specific schools officers, it's helpful for them to do the presentations because the young people recognise them in school, and if they've ever come up against anything, it will be the SSO that they're dealing with. So it's all about that relationship building to try and break down those barriers. I mean, probably a prime example of this is with our pupil referral unit. The schools officer in there has worked extremely hard with some of the most vulnerable young people on the borough, and a prime example of that is fight broke out. He was there. Him and another colleague jumped in to try and resolve said fight. and other pupils from the Prue wanted to jump in, and actually members of the school were like to some of the pupils, hang on, stay back, this is our schools officer. No, you're not touching our schools officer. And that's the kind of relationship we're looking to try and build with some of these young people to install that trust that is there. So ultimately, we've got to be careful about what we do with the young people. We can't be seen to do some of the sort of heavy-handed. I appreciate there are heavy-handed stuff that sort of needs to go on the more that needs to go on, but ultimately we're not there to do that. We're there to build those relationships so that they can turn to us, talk to us, and try and get the information in and around the safeguarding out of them and the issues, because ultimately when you build those relationships, they're more likely to turn, like I say, to my schools officer for the pupil referral unit, Damien, more likely to turn and tell him stuff, and we then tend to find out, get snippets of what is going on. And it's about working with the school to enable that to happen. It's working in partnership with the school, to enable that to happen.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope that answers.
Okay, that's okay. No, thank you. That's a good answer. I'll do one final question, then we'll let you leave.
Fine.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I just wondered, what are your targets, and how do you judge success, and who sets those targets? Because obviously the work you do is definitely very important and very worthwhile. But how do you know and your superiors know that you're targeting in the right places and we're achieving good outcomes? Peter, if you wish to jump in on this, you're very welcome to as well.
So obviously there's obviously there's a number of measures that we look across the school. So firstly, in the first instance, I look at coverage and what activities the officers are doing in the school. So what visits are they making? So we look at output and productivity that they're making in the school, like presentations, engagements, etc. Obviously, the key measure is youth violence and what's happening with our young people, right? And ultimately, that's influenced by a number of factors well beyond just the role of the schools officers. But that's the ultimate measure that we look at. So knife injury with violence for the youth is one of our key performance measures that we look at across the entire organisation, right the way from at a local ward level all the way up to a Met-wide level. So that's the ultimate measure. But really, what we look at is the productivity of our schools officers, what they're doing, the engagements they're making. It's a very nebulous thing, a schools officer, in terms of you tell something you don't know, and you can't tick a box to whether that has landed with the children that you're speaking to until you really see the behaviour change, which again itself is much more difficult to judge. So we look at the productivity and output, and then the overall levels of violence.
Personally, I think there is a value on the nebulous, actually, and I think it's important that is seen as well as the target culture. So that's good to hear. Sorry, I cut you off in the middle. Is there anything else that you... No,
I think that's it. Unless there's anything else you'd like me to...
No, that's great. So, Sergeant Keith, thank you very much for coming tonight, and you may go now if you wish. Would you like me to go first? No, yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, you can continue, that's fine. So.
Okay, so I think what I'll do is I'll give a brief update on activity on the borough and what's going on, particularly timely at this time of year, and then I'll look into the performance data and how we're doing, areas where we can do with some improvement, areas where I think we're performing pretty well. So firstly, it's been an incredibly busy period for the Met, an incredibly busy period for us in West Area. I think in the summer, over the last couple of weeks, we've had to move to 12-hour shifts, which to free up additional resources to help with the ongoing demand pan-London, which has obviously been exacerbated by Extinction Rebellion, which has put a heavy demand on our officers, taking them away from where I frankly believe they should be focused, which is on fighting crime, and also obviously in support of very busy weekends like the August Bank Holiday weekend, and as well as the Dare the Arms exhibition that's on at the moment. So we give up officers for aid for all of these events, as well as what we have locally. So there's been a significant volume of work through the summer, and I think I would say our officers are tired, but working extremely hard at the moment. What we're coming into now is into our autumn nights period, as we get to the end of the summer, which is when we traditionally see rises in burglary as we get darker evenings, etc. So we do have a comprehensive program in conjunction with the local authority around our autumn nights that we run every year, and we'll be doing the same program this year. And I know Jackie's team's heavily involved in that. When looking at performance, I think it's more useful to look at performance where we were in 2019, because 2020 we were in a virtual lockdown and no one was out and about, if we think about this time last year. So the statistics I'm going to run through now, comparing against that period previously, which I think is a more appropriate measure as to what has happened. So if I look at overall offences, we are down just under 14%, which is a reduction of 3,700 offences, which is quite a significant reduction over the period. If I look into the detail around that in terms of some of the offences which are of most relevance to the community in Hillingdon, burglary is down just under 40%, which is 990 fewer offences. Robbery is down just under 45%, which is 355 fewer offences. Violence with injury is down 14.5%, which is 370 fewer offences. Total gun crime is down 40%, which is 19 fewer offences. Total knife crime is down 43%, which is 155 fewer offences. Knife injury victims under 25 non-domestic abuse, which is one of our key measures of youth violence, down 24%, which is 7 fewer offences. Volume crime, shoplifting, down 27%, 428 fewer offences. And theft person, down 40%, which is 213 fewer offences. Antisocial behaviour, down 12.5%, which is just under 1,700 fewer offences. So those are the areas where I think we're doing well, and what I'm really pleased to see is, as we came out of lockdown, is we've been able to sustain those reductions, particularly around robbery and burglary, which was my area of real concern coming out of lockdown, and those reductions have been sustained. There are 3 real areas of concern I have at the moment. One is domestic abuse, which is up just under 4.5%, which is 128 more offences than we had. We did expect this. We knew that lockdown was going to exacerbate domestic abuse. Obviously, we've worked very closely with the local authority to create capacity within our multi-agency framework to address that. We've also seen a significant rise in sexual offences. So other sexual offences, so this is non-rape offences, up 26%, which is 83 additional offences. And rape itself is up 10%, which is 17 more offences than we had over the previous period. Around sexual offences, if I look at the nature of them, more than 50% of them are within a domestic or familial setting, so that has increased quite considerably also, which is what we expected with the lockdown and that proximity within a closed environment through that space. We've also seen a significant increase in reporting of sexual offences, particularly following the publicity around the terrible homicide of Sarah Everard that generated. So that is encouraging to see more people willing to come forward and report sexual abuse. In terms of the actual incidents themselves, we have very few stranger rapes. We have seen more of the exposure type of offences and touching over clothes offences. And sexting offences, which is of concern. We do have a number of initiatives that we are leading at the moment to try and bring this under, to address these issues. In particular, we've relaunched our Ask Angela campaign, and we're working with the pub watch groups and all the licensed premises across the borough. So Ask Angela, for those that don't know, it's a campaign whereby any person can ask a member of bar staff or waiters or door staff for Angela, and that is effectively a warning that they need some help. That can be as simple as getting a taxi home for them or alerting us that we probably have an issue and we can dispatch officers to the scene. So we have a large publicity campaign and have been training all the bar staff, restaurant staff, all the licensed premises staff around that campaign. Our patrol strategy also reflects this very much so. It's across our high footfall areas, our open spaces, our routes to and from the transport network. So we're putting our officers in the right place at the right time. We've also got a number of small initiatives that we're piloting. The one which I'm most interested about that we're piloting is our female officers are arranging walks along transport routes with groups of female residents that they get together and they can walk the route and talk about how they feel, their safety, etc. And the female police officers, will give them advice, etc. So we've just started that pilot, and I think we'll be rolling it out in Hillingdon, I hope, before we get into our real autumn nights and our periods of having darkness to and from the tube stops. So I think that's got some real potential. So that's sort of a brief overview of performance. A lot of good work, but clearly in those areas around domestic abuse, sexual offences and rape, some areas of concern. Apart from that, some other updates I think of interest. Obviously, we continue to grow as an organisation. We are still pushing for our 6,000 additional officers. Hopefully, it will get us part of the 20,000 uplift. We're already starting to invest those. We'll have another 50 officers across the BCU, which includes Hillingdon, starting on response in the next couple of months. We will looking at an uplift of neighbourhoods officers, which will include some capacity for town centre teams. So the details of that are not finalised, but I expect that to be announced before the year end. So all in all, it's been a very difficult period, exacerbated obviously quite significantly by some of the factors around COVID. And it's one where I think the interagency working has never been more useful or more valued.
Thank you very much. I will take Chair's prerogative and ask two questions, and I'll open up to the rest of the committee. But before then, the Ask Angela campaign and the Walking Routes campaign seems like very good things to me. Jackie, are we sort of helping with promoting that? And is that because? Oh, sorry, your microphone.
Yes, we are. We're doing a lot of joint working with the police at the moment. We have an event on the 19th of October, which is in the hall next to Botwell Church, which is for women, and it's around safety, health and well-being. And the police are actively involved in that as well, so we will be promoting it there too.
Great, because it's exactly the type of thing. Promoting it is what really good in terms of creating, an atmosphere of safety as well as the actual things. So that'd be very useful. Thank you. Okay, my first main question is about how you engage with the local community, and one of the reasons we invited Roy along as well, because we really wanted to sort of talk about that intersection, and sort of how do you access the help that some communities want to give? And there is part sort of negative aspect to this question. I've been told that there are a couple of occasions where, officers have been given information, maybe pictures of somebody doing an act, for example, that's legal, and it's not really going anywhere, for example. But even more than that, not getting information about where things are going. Also, I have been told that sometimes, people have been told that, something might be criminal but too low level to be able to concentrate on, and obviously that might create sort of a negative impression among some communities about how the police are interested in solving issues which are important to them. Now, I don't want to comment on those specific individual examples. Maybe we can talk, possibly outside the meeting, because I know I wouldn't want you in this meeting. But ultimately, I do get a feeling that in some senses, communities with better communication technology are able to feel like they can give more, but sometimes they get frustrated when their help doesn't seem to be taken on in the way that they should. I mean, so sort of more broadly, can you tell me about how police officers can engage with the community, and also maybe any sort of challenge, like the challenges I've raised? Are there challenges that you're aware of?
So firstly, obviously, I can't speak to specific incidents because I'm not aware of them. I'd say first and foremost, if anybody passes an allegation of a crime to an officer, be it by look at what this person's done, showing an image, or reporting a crime, the officer is duty bound to record that as a crime, to put a crime report on, which is then assessed for investigation. So if an officer were to be made aware of a crime and not reported, that is a serious failing of their duty, and something which certainly we as an organisation and myself as the local commander would not tolerate. So that's firstly to address that one. So our community policing model is very much based around our wards and our DWOs, or our dedicated ward officers. So every ward, in theory, because we do have a couple of vacancies, has 2 dedicated ward officers and a police community support officer. And they're the main conduit within the proximity of that ward for community relations with the residents of that ward. So within that, they will be holding workshops or meetings where people can access them. They do have ward panels that they can access, etc. And this is our key means of the local police officers being aware of the concerns of the local community within that ward space. We then have wider communication networks that we leverage. I think in Hillingdon, we're very lucky that we still have the OWL network, because I know some areas have moved away from that, and we supported that when I came on. We definitely didn't want that to go. I think we have, I'm not sure, Roy, you probably able to tell how many people we have on OWL now.
17,000.
17,000, yeah. In Hillingdon, yeah.
Email.
Yeah.
The people on YouTube who are watching can't hear us if we don't have our mics on.
That's fine. So there's about 17,000 people contacted by email, which in a household will obviously bulk up to perhaps double that number. So quite a significant spread.
But I think in answer to your questions about things not going anywhere, I think one of the things that we definitely can be better at is talking about what we do and the success. Because I think a lot of our communications on OWL are alerting people to an incident that's taken place. And I don't believe that we're using it effectively to talk about actually we've made these arrests or we've done this on the basis of information that you've provided. I don't think we do that enough. We do it in a limited fashion. So I think certainly there needs to be more of that. In terms of individual frustration, where people pass information on and they feel it's not acted upon or they don't get the feedback, I can only apologize for that, because if the information is passed on, generally the officer that receives that information should be able to put on a report. The report should state this is where the information's come from, and there should be a feedback loop to make the persons aware. Obviously there will always be incidents sometimes where it's inappropriate to disclose information, and we wouldn't be able to do that. But for generic information where people have raised concerns, like say there's ASB in an area or something like that, we should be able to feed back to them exactly what we've done about those issues they've raised.
Thank you. I mean, in my area, we've got a pretty good ward panel, and it's pretty active, chaired very well, and local councillors do attend, and I found that to be a useful forum where, if residents aren't so keen, and if I speak to my local SMP team, they're really good at actually reacting to that and taking that on board. But if that isn't the case, and some residents are frustrated, is there another mechanism or other people that they can speak to about that issues? And I don't really want formal mechanisms, because that's not, people just want to sort of feel like that their issues being taken seriously, or maybe explained why not. So if somebody was frustrated and maybe their ward panel wasn't operating brilliantly, I know some places it isn't, what would you recommend to those people?
I think there's plenty they can do. So certainly if a ward panel's not working, I should know about it, and generally I would, because I'd get that feedback directly from residents. So I often get letters saying, listen, this is not working, this area's not working, we've got some frustrations here, and that will come in. I may not always answer it directly. It might go to my neighbourhood superintendent before it comes to me, or it'll come to me, and then we'll be able to address that. So residents do contact us. I also meet on a regular basis, at least monthly, with all the MPs, and quite often I get information that's passed to the MPs by constituents, which they would then like me to address and look at. So as well as information that comes through councillors, etc., that comes to myself. So there's many mechanisms by which that information can come in if they're dissatisfied with the ward panel, which I'd be sorry if they are, because that shows me that we're not doing something right and we have to address that.
Thank you. And I have a second question before I go to, I see committee members have their hands up, which is great. My second question is built on the point you made about Extinction Rebellion, and obviously that is something that is important that we police. But obviously within Hillingdon, we provide funds for extra officers. So I suppose as a politician, if somebody asks me, are we getting value for that extra money we put in? If our police officers are being sent to Wembley or to Extinction Rebellion, is it worth us giving the extra money to allow some extra officers if they're actually not used in Hillingdon. I mean, that's a very retail way of putting it, but that's the kind of conversations I have. So could you talk to us about, the extra money we put in for extra officers and assure us that those officers are adding extra benefit to the policing you would otherwise do in Hillingdon?
Most definitely they're adding benefit. And those officers are ring-fenced, so we'd only use those in extreme circumstances, what we call a red day. So they're ring-fenced. They're not taken for generic aid. They're only taken on sort of extreme aid days, which would be a red day. So most of the time they're absolutely ring-fenced, and I could probably get for you the data if you'd like to look at how much time they're spent off. I can get that for you. Yeah.
That would be really useful if you could email Nikki that. That would be fantastic. Thank you.
The team's invaluable, right? It's extremely useful for us. I think we work well in conjunction with the local authority, with the joint taskings, and coming in through both our tactical tasking coordination group as well as the work we do with the local authority. I think they address a lot of issues that would be under-resourced otherwise. So I do feel that they add significant value to policing in and across Hillingdon. And they're not officers, I just want to be really clear, they're not officers that you're paying for, that we're taking to work elsewhere. The work that they do is joint tasked here locally, and it is locally based within the borough.
It sounds quite selfish, but in a way, because obviously we have to
course.
respond to our residents.
You are paying for
the
them.
tax they pay. Okay, so I'll let June ask the first question.
Thank you, Chairman. Borough Commander, thank you. I just want to draw to your attention that on your list of all the different things you have here, there's no hate crime on the list, seeing that we live in a diverse community. Why is that not on the list here?
It should be, and I apologise, and I'll make sure it's there next time. Well, I can talk to hate crime, absolutely. We have experienced a rise in hate crime. Not a significant rise, but the rise we've experienced has been aggravated rather than motivated hate crime. So this is where an offence has been committed and it's aggravated, whereby the person would use a, should we say, for example, a homophobic slur or a racist slur in commission of the crime. So punching somebody and saying something nasty as and when they punch somebody. So we have very few instances of, shall we say, racially motivated or hate crime motivated hate crimes, whereby a person or an individual is deliberately targeted because of a protected characteristic that they happen to share. So we have fewer incidents of motivated hate crime, but we have seen an increase in incident of aggravated hate crime. And whenever we have sort of significant issues, particularly sort of significant international issues which impact on immigration, which impact on operations overseas, etc., we generally tend to see that. So we have had that we have experienced a slight increase in aggravated crimes, and I'll get the exact data for you. And I apologise that it's not there, because you're absolutely right, it should be, and that's an oversight on our behalf.
Thank you for that, and I hope we get some kind of report on that. The other question I want to speak to you about, and I'm going to talk about my locality, is we've got special PSOs and dedicated officers. The concerns that some of our residents have is when crimes is reported and it seems minor to police, but it's a major to residents, is antisocial behavior, theft of cars. We have a lot of that happening. We have a few burglaries, but yet still at the same time, residents feel that when this is reported, no one seems to come and see them. It's reported, they get the CAD number, but yet still there is no one follow-up to see what the concerns is, or even to look, as you said, if videos are there, then it should be taken up. There's videos recording of crime being committed in my locality, but yet still no police officer has actually visited to find out or speak to that individual about the crime that took place. And what is done about who have the visit? How does the police officers do their visit? Because again, we have concerns about antisocial behavior with cars, people in cars taking drugs, using the what you call those little canisters. A lot takes place at a certain time of the night, in the day. At a certain time in the night, it was even brought to our attention that it's even happening during the school run time. a lot of that's taking place. Yet still, there is no any of our officers or police officers available. Sometimes we only have one police officer or one PSO in our area that's on duty. And, you know, residents really don't feel safe nor secure that if they have a concern, why is the police not taking it on board? And question being asked, what are we paying the police for if they cannot come and visit us to see what the problem is? And if you go on the ground there, that's what you're going to get back and feedback to us on regular occasions, especially when a crime committed. In the Cranford area, we've got a lot of this what you call this car thing, catalyst being stolen from car. It's a very big crime now that's happening in that locality. But yet still, residents feel that the police is not doing anything about it because they feel that, to the way the police is concerned, is not a priority. So can you give me some reassurance on what you're doing about that?
Okay. If I can answer, there were a lot of points there, so I'll try and make sure I address all of them, but please stop me if I don't address all of them. So firstly and foremost, I don't have enough officers to send an officer to every single crime that ever takes place across London, or we would never, you know, we would grind to a halt. So I just want to be clear on that. What happens when a crime is reported? It depends on how it's reported. So if it's reported as to an officer on the scene, the officer on the scene should conduct a primary investigation at that point in time when they attend the crime. So if someone calls and says, I have something going on, and an officer attends, they should conduct a primary investigation at that point in time. If the crime is reported online or comes into our phone services, what will happen is the crime report will be taken there and an initial assessment will be done. That initial assessment will determine whether a crime comes through to us for further investigation or whether it stays where it is and goes no further, because they assess that there's not enough leads to make it a viable investigation. If it comes to us, then we have to look at it and take it and investigate it and take it forward. So that's just a little bit of the process, so you understand. So unfortunately, not all crimes that are phoned into the centre, whilst we'll record them and we'll know the data, they don't get passed to us for investigation. If that assessment takes place and they deem that the crime is not solvable from their perspective. So they'll answer questions over the phone and say, do you have this, do you have that? And they'll make an assessment. Obviously, any significant crime, we will always dispatch officers to. You know, any high harm crime will always do so. Our priority within the organisation is violence and youth violence, and that has been our priority, and that's where I've focused my officers. In an ideal world, I'd like to be able to follow everything, but I can't. I do have to prioritise. And I think, you know, from my perspective, preventing somebody from being stabbed or being hurt severely is my number one priority, is preventing that level of harm or preventing somebody from being seriously sexually assaulted. So when it comes to discretion about where I put my patrols and where I put my officers, I will always prioritise those higher harm areas. That's not to say that those crimes aren't impactful on the residents, as you rightfully mentioned. And it's not to say that they're not massively you know, affected by those crimes. I do appreciate that. With catalytic converters, we do run a number of operations. We run an Operation Chicha, which a fast roads operation where we try and stop the people coming in and out and identify them through number plate recognition. So all that data that's given to us about, I got this number plate, etc., goes into that, and then we take out those vehicles and those people within the vehicles. We have had a lot of success from that. When a crime comes in, it's always assessed. So even if a crime comes into us, it's always assessed for immediate response, which means it's a crime in action, or there's a high level of risk or harm, and we need to get there within 15 minutes. Or it's a non-immediate response, which means we will phone and we'll make an assessment, or we'll respond within an hour if it's an S grade. So we do have to have a level of classification, because we can't respond to all crimes equally, because some have more harm than others. But the officers that we do have across West area, and I think across Hillingdon, do work incredibly hard at addressing everything that they can do. And we do try to put them in the areas where we've got the most crime. And something which is antisocial behaviour, if we are not able to respond to it immediately, what will happen is we have an airspace system which we record that, and we'll discuss that with the local authority, and we'll discuss that in our tactical tasking groups, and we may then put a tasking into the area to try and prevent that going forward, or it will be passed to the local neighbourhood team, the Safer Neighbourhoods team, so the two officers in DWO to try and troubleshoot that problem, to engage with the individuals, and try and fix that solution. But I can't promise that we'll give the same response to, for example, a stabbing as we would do to a catalytic converter.
I do understand what you're saying in regards to that, but how do you explain that to the residents? Because if the crime is not deemed, if it's passed through the system, it's not deemed as urgent, or it's not deemed as being something that is potentially non-existent, in my opinion, but just take that as in my opinion, then what would the residents, how is the residents then informed that the crime has been attended to, this is the outcome, or this is where it's going to go? There is no feedback to the residents in regards to what action is taken, and that is the frustrating bit too as well, because I was a crime. I did had a burglary done, and I didn't get no feedback at all. Okay. Right. So
did you not get a letter from us?
I didn't get absolutely zero, but this is going back 2 years down the line. I get absolutely nothing. So if that, me as a councillor get that, what about those residents who have no access or no way in finding out what is the police doing? No one comes back and say anything to us. It's just left like that. No matter how we report, it's just left like that. It's like nothing happens. And the officers, they do work hard, and I give the PSOs in my area, I give them their due, because sometimes it's just one person on duty that's able to take into consideration everything that's reported, because when there's a crime, I do copy the local SNT into the report, so they're fully aware of what's being reported. But the antisocial behavior and stuff is, really, they really need to be more feet on the ground, so that residents can feel safe, secure, knowing that whatever happening, there is somebody there for them and with them. Because you get back and forward. We have the same problem with the council as well, where antisocial behavior is, and it's supposed to be reported to the police. Okay, we report it to the police, but the police is not doing it. It's supposed to be. So residents really don't have no confidence at all that anything will happen in regards to something that is viewed as a minor, or something not to take to be as a high priority. So residents need to feel comfortable with that.
Yeah. So firstly, I'm sorry the residents feel like that, and if someone reports a crime, the crime should be recorded. And if there are no investigative opportunities, it is closed down at that stage, a resident should get a letter explaining that. That is part of our policy. So if that's not happening, that's definitely something I look at, because that is done automatically. That the crime effectively can't be closed internally within our system without that happening. Certainly for a crime where there's an investigative lead, we have a requirement to update the victim and tell them what's going on with the investigation. And it's a requirement on our officers to keep them updated. But clearly from what you're saying is you do not feel that's the case. So I'll look into that and I'll see why. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's an important sort of a theme that sometimes, obviously in a way we hear from frustrated people, but yeah, no, in the future, sort of hearing about how you ensure that feedback happens would be very, very useful actually. Thank you. Hina.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is just around, obviously we've got the OWL app and we've got social media where a lot of engagement is actually publicised, so residents are made aware of different systems or different, S&T meetings, I guess, where they can interact and ask questions with the local teams. But I'm just unsure about how we're reaching out to those residents who are not digitally connected. How do we ensure that they're getting the message that there's a meeting where they can actually ask questions of their local Safer Neighbourhood team, for instance? Yeah,
it is more difficult. Obviously, the opportunity that technology gives us to communicate at scale. We do attend community meetings, etc., where we can and make people available. So quite often we will piggyback on other community meetings that are arranged within the local community to do that. But sort of bar leafleting every door on a regular basis, which we simply don't have the capacity to do. It is a lot more difficult. I think it's a valid point. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Roy, from your perspective.
No, what I would say is that we have a network of about 500 watch coordinators throughout the borough, and many of those use the traditional approach of a newsletter, speak to the residents. A lot of those aren't on, they're not geared up for internet access. So that is, if we knew of a particular problem in a particular area, we could obviously approach that coordinator to perhaps get that message across.
Roy, do you think there's a good relationship in terms of information between the police and Neighbourhood Watch? And so your coordinators are, you know, if there is an issue, that they might be utilised to do that, for example?
There's an excellent relationship, but we could do with more data and more information, and as Peter said, more about quick wins or, you know, useful bits of information. We do. When we come to my talk, when we're going to talk about some of those, we could do with some more of those, because that is really good from my point of view. It's good for police, you know, measure of residents and community support, you know. So that is an option to think about, and use OWL as well, of course, you know.
We'll cover more of that later when you do your presentation. Anything else? Okay, Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. We spent a lot of time through the summer and before that, once the pandemic started to ease, knocking on doors across the borough. And I've been quite alarmed at how low the confidence is in the reporting mechanisms for the police. And actually, how there are other issues where residents don't feel safe at all to be able to report anything. I saw on a mobile phone someone's Ring doorbell a few days before the August Bank Holiday weekend, where there were two people wielding large knives at each other in a residential street. They wouldn't share it with me. They were definitely not going to share it with the police. They were scared because of the drug dealing and drug issues, and there wasn't much information on drugs in here, or drugs, you know, the impact of crime because of drug dealing and drug use. Unless I've missed it, but it concerns me at how low that confidence is, and it will be from the messaging where low-level incidents aren't a priority, understandably, with resources, but how that resonates then through to violent crime, and also the lack of contact people have had either pandemic-wise or just generally because there's large areas and fewer officers, means that intelligence gathering isn't there. And I know from my area we have a very, not where I live but where I represent, we have a very infrequent wall panel. And it's digital at the moment, which obviously excludes a certain part of the population, but one of the most useful wall panels we had was when the Muslim community were able to articulate very strongly their views on the hate crime they were experiencing. And it was, you know, physically present, yes, that makes a difference, but it was also because they felt comfortable and confident to come to that meeting. They were invited specifically as well. And it's more of that engagement on the street that I would want to hear more about, where different communities who are being targeted or generally different areas are having more access with those street level so that they can attend community meetings. And with wall panels happening ad hoc, inconsistently across the borough, and often, and I may have got this wrong, but in my impression, often the areas with the most crime seem to have the less consistency with wall panels, or tend to have the less coverage with the use of, or sign up, when it comes to our neighbourhood watches. And I know that people who are disengaged are less likely to be engaged with reporting and tackling crime, but it seems like a circle where at the moment there's a lack of representation and voice and connection in the areas where there are some high crimes, and I worry the impact that's going to have, particularly if we're trying to tackle violent and serious crime. And I know there is obviously more funding hopefully coming for more police officers, but it's what more can be done so that there's a uniform approach to the borough and a uniform approach with kind of connectivity with officers. And I will just say 101, just to leave it out there, because it does not really, people won't use it to report crime. The online stuff, those who can will. But I do worry about how people get access to officers and how they feel confident to report things. And if it's not happening with violent crime, and there's less violent or minor crimes aren't necessarily having any outcome, where is the solution to build confidence? And that just a general concern, not necessarily a question, but just a general concern. And I'm also concerned that I know that officers locally to us have said, well, residents have told us, they said not to report things to local councillors, but to go, just not to do that. And things like that concern me, because if you're engaging with MPs, engaging with at that level, and you want to engage more with councillors, it would be useful if councillors can then engage more with their ward teams, and if residents do provide information, they're not discouraged to provide information to anybody. We can at least gather some of the evidence and intelligence that police need in order to challenge crime in the areas.
Thank you. I was just trying to get some public confidence thing. I think certainly, I think if I start with drugs, so the link between drugs and violence is inexplicable, right? Drugs offences are police-generated crime, right? We get drugs offences when we search somebody, or we do an operation, proactive operation to get the drugs. So it's considered police-generated activity. We lead the Met in action against drugs. We are the first borough to run the drugs focus desk, which is effectively an enhanced response to drugs, recognising the links between drugs and violence. And that model that we started here has now been rolled out across the entire organisation. And we prosecute more people for drugs offences than any other area in the Met. So it is definitely a priority, and the link between drugs and violence is well-founded and well understood. So it very much is a focus. So when I talk about our activity around violence, and I talk about the numbers, particularly if you consider we've halved robbery, we've halved gun crime and almost halved knife crime. These are significant improvements in violence, and a lot of that is generated off the work we're doing around drugs and those involved in the drugs trade. So I think the improvements we've had have been significant. In terms of confidence and satisfaction, I acknowledge the challenges with 101. We know that as an organisation. We are investing in it. We've added significant numbers of operators over the summer and will continue to do so. So it is an improving service. But I do acknowledge the challenges that there are with 101, which is why we are promoting more the online. But clearly, as you articulated, that's not suitable for everyone. So I do acknowledge the challenges there, and it is something that we are, we're improving every month in terms of that. In terms of public confidence and satisfaction, yeah, it varies across the borough. I mean, Hillingdon has got one of the highest levels as an overall borough, one of the highest levels of confidence and satisfaction in the police as measured by MOPAC in its public attitude survey, and that's publicly available. That's on the MOPAC website. But clearly that varies within communities, and that varies within different wards. It saddens me when I hear that people aren't confident in reporting to the police or our response, because clearly that's what we're here to do. So on that, I can only apologise for how they feel. But certainly it is not from any perspective of wanting to treat areas differently or anything like that. When you talk about it, it seems like the poorer areas are ones that have fewer officers. That's not the case at all. When we go into our tasking and coordination groups, our tasking and coordination, which is where we put our discretionary officers, etc., our patrols, our additional officers, that's all based on demand on our services. So those officers all go into the areas where we experience most crime, not the areas where we experience least crime. There's no point in me putting a group of officers around Rice of Lido, in the middle of the night, because nothing's going to happen around there. But there's a lot of sense for me putting a group of officers around the Red Brick Estate in Hayes on a Friday night, because I know that that it's an area of concern. So our tasking coordination, where we put our discretionary effort, is very much based on where we have the most prevalence of crime. Have I covered all the points? Sorry, I may have missed some.
No, I really appreciate that very candid and honest response. So I suppose if we're looking at solutions, I think in terms of neighbourhood level, I think it'd be really, really useful to work with councillors as to how there can be an expansion of information through the creation of new neighbourhood watches and other things, but also through using local community organisations to raise profile. There are only so many officers, and only so So to increase that through using voluntary sector partners and other community groups and residents that we know are passionate is probably the best way to put it, about certain issues in their road and connecting them a bit more. So I would just encourage if we can try and increase the dialogue with ourselves and community leaders in all areas of the borough, just consistently, in order to just try and find ways of building that confidence. If you are saying, as you are, that it's being dealt with, and obviously there's a communication, and you can't spend all your time just telling people what's going on.
There's clearly a challenge there from what you've said, so that's something we have to address.
To maybe through this committee and the chair to look at ways in which that can be increased, and the resource of councillors who are aware of their communities can point you to different partners that can help promote the work you're doing, particularly in the voluntary sector.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, just interestingly listening to what Stuart was saying, I mean, from my perspective, where we are, the SNT works very well, and I would use that forum for the type of stuff you're discussing. And we did have an issue moderately recently where there was an uptick in crime in one of our areas, which statistically might have not looked particularly amazing, but because the nature of the burglary had turned to basically aggravated burglary, I think possibly because more people at home, it created a sort of sense of fear in the community I hadn't noticed before, because we occasionally always have upticks in burglary. And at the beginning, the local police, I think, weren't aware of the atmosphere. They saw the stats as much as anything else. But through conversations, we were able to come up with a programme where, over a week, we basically delivered and knocked on loads of doors in order to, as a part of the community, let's increase confidence in how do you deal with certain things, and how do you make sure your car can be safe and can go to theft, because it's not just the theft, it's actually the people who do it quickly and do it aggressively, and do it when you're sat in your front room. But for the issues you're describing, Stuart, that's how I would sort of deal with them, and so far that's been very successful. But I think there is a need for us to understand as councillors, if that isn't working, how do we do that? How do we deal with that? So I think that would be useful. So who can Stuart? Because obviously some very good ideas there that I think the local police would definitely want to know about.
Absolutely.
I'm sure. Maybe some information for councillors to how we could help and get that information and work with the police on that would be very useful.
I think what from the feedback I've had today, I completely agree. I think that at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, which is we want crime to go down, and we want people to feel safe and protected in their own homes, and we want to safeguard those who are vulnerable. So, we all want exactly the same thing. So, any assistance we can give each other, I think, is most welcome. I will take that, and I'll take that as a commitment.
June.
Can I also ask you to take back as well, because we used to have quarterly police gathering with residents where we can go and knock on doors, especially where there is high reports of crime or antisocial behavior. We can go into that area and find out from residents, have a conversation with them. We used to have that. We no longer have that, and that is because we got the lack of PSOs now, because as I said, we only have two. It's only one most of the time that is around. So perhaps to look at ways to see how that can be engaging. You can merge two wards together and do that. And we also used to have a stall, a police stall, talking to residents about crime prevention, and so forth. None of that exists anymore. So perhaps it's another way of how you can look to see how we can get the community more trustworthy, more engaging with the police if their presence is there.
Yeah. No, absolutely, I agree. I mean, I think some of our larger public meetings we actually paused because of COVID. So we are relaunching those and reinvigorating them. So I think absolutely valid points.
If everybody's okay, I'll bring the public part of this meeting to a close. And when we come back for the private part, and everybody watching on YouTube, I'm afraid you won't be able to watch that, but Roy from Neighbourhood Watch will give us his presentation and we'll have further discussion. So Nikki's just going to switch off the live feed. I'm going to get myself a glass of water, and then we'll start again very soon.